Okay, I just wanted to go over number 9 a little bit because there's a bit of confusion about domain and range here. The question tells us there's a rectangle that has an area of 7,200 square centimeters. It's a poster, and you're asked to find the function. I think people could find the function fairly easily. If this is the width and that's the length, okay, we know that the length times the width is equal to 7,200, the area. And then it says to write the length in terms of the width. In other words, isolate for L. So that's pretty simple. It's just 7,200 divided by W. And that's the function that you would plot. Y equals 7,200 over X. What we're basically plotting there. So that wasn't an issue. You get a hyperbola. Looks just like Y equals 1 over X or similar to it. But then people were wondering how come they get the domain as being anything less than 60 root 2, anything greater than 0. This is kind of a matter of semantics and just definitions. Really, you could say that the width could be anything over 0. Okay? But then they stop at this point for a good reason. Let me show you why on a more simple example. Okay? So let's just, I'll come back to that example in a sec here. Imagine that I had a square, or a rectangle rather, that had an area of 16 centimeters squared. Okay. Now I could have for length and width. Okay. I could have a length, or let's say a width of 1, a length of 16, a width of 2, a length of 8, a width of 4, and a length of 4, where they're the same. In other words, a square. And then if I say a width of 8 and a length of 2 like that, well, technically, this is no longer the width because technically the length is the longer measurement. So, in other words, I stop here and these don't matter. Okay? Only those matter, where the length is longer than the width. And the length is longer than the width, the length is longer than the width up until the point where they're the same. In other words, up until the point where you have a square. Okay? And so for a square, the side length is just equal to the square root of the area. Because for a square, the area is side length squared. In other words, take the square root of both sides, and the side length is equal to 4. I'm going to ignore the negative root here, obviously, because there's no such thing as a negative side length. So there's how I get that answer. Okay? Go back up to our original problem here, where the length and the width are equal. They're going to be the same side length, and they will be the square root of 7,200. Okay? Now, if you want to go back to grade 10 with mixed radicals, okay, that's the same as saying the square root of 3,600 times square root of 2. Square root of 3,600 is 60 times root 2. In other words, this and this are the exact same. Okay? So this domain is just saying basically the width is anything greater than 0 up until the point where the width and the length become the same, in which case it's no longer the width. Okay? So up until 60 root 2, we're good. And then after that, the width becomes the length, start going back down again. And that's the only difference that they made. So if you got that width had to be greater than 0, that's fine. I don't think there's much more you need to worry about that. I'm not worried about those kind of picky type questions for the homework, or for the test rather, but that's where they got their answer from.